Tonight, we leave behind the roaring dragons of House Targaryen and travel instead to the sunlit shores of Dorne, where the mountains meet the summer sea, and the oldest legends are carved not into castles, but into the stars themselves. Many knights became famous because they won great battles, others because they ruled kingdoms. Arthur Dayne did neither. Yet centuries after his death, warriors still whispered his name with admiration. Even men who had stood against him remembered him with respect. For in all the histories of Westeros, few names carried as much honor as Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. If you enjoy these slow journeys through the history and lore of George R. R. Martin's world, feel free to subscribe or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let us ride south to one of the oldest castles in all the Seven Kingdoms. Long before the Targaryens crossed the narrow sea, before Aegon's dragons united Westeros, and even before the Andals brought steel and the faith of the Seven to these lands, there stood a lonely fortress overlooking the western coast of Dorne. Starfall. Unlike many castles built for conquest, Starfall seemed almost peaceful. Its pale stone towers rose above the mouth of the Torrentine River, where fresh mountain water flowed into the endless blue of the summer sea. From its highest walls, one could watch fishing boats drifting quietly along the coast while seabirds circled overhead. It was a place where sunrise painted the cliffs gold each morning, and the stars appeared brighter than almost anywhere else in Westeros. House Dayne had ruled these lands for thousands of years. So ancient was their lineage that even the maesters struggled to separate history from legend. Most noble families traced their beginnings to great kings or famous conquerors. The Danes told a different story. They spoke of a falling star. According to the oldest tales, a brilliant meteor crossed the heavens during the Dawn Age, crashing into the earth near the mouth of the Torrentine. Rather than fearing the strange stone from the sky, the first Danes approached it with wonder. From its pale heart, they forged a sword unlike any other. They named it Dawn. Though often mistaken for Valyrian steel by those who had never seen it, Dawn was something entirely different. Its blade was said to shine like milk glass beneath the morning sun, pale as moonlight and impossibly smooth. It had not been forged in the fires of Valyria. It was older. A gift from the heavens themselves, if the ancient stories were to be believed. Yet Dawn was never simply inherited. Unlike the ancestral swords carried by many great houses, it did not automatically pass from father to eldest son. Only a knight judged worthy could bear it. Only then could he claim the ancient title, Sword of the Morning. Generations sometimes passed without anyone receiving that honor. The sword would remain within Starfall, waiting patiently for another worthy hand. That tradition made the title perhaps the rarest in all Westeros. Not every generation produced such a knight. It would produce one now. Arthur Dayne was born sometime during the reign of King Aerys II Targaryen, though the exact year has never been recorded with certainty. Like many details surrounding his early life, the histories remain surprisingly quiet. Perhaps that silence is fitting. Great legends often begin in ordinary ways. There were no prophecies announcing his birth, no blazing comet crossing the sky, no visiting maester declaring that greatness had arrived. He was simply another son of an ancient house, growing up within the stone halls of Starfall. Yet from an early age, those around him noticed something unusual. Arthur possessed a calmness uncommon among noble boys. He listened more than he spoke. He observed before acting, When other children argued over games or boasted of impossible victories they would one day win, Arthur often stood quietly beside them, watching with thoughtful eyes. His tutors found him respectful. The castle guards found him endlessly curious. Rather than asking about songs of famous heroes, he wanted to know why certain battles had been lost, why experienced knights sometimes made foolish decisions. My courage alone could never guarantee victory. Those questions revealed a thoughtful mind, but it was in the training yard where Arthur truly came alive. Like every noble son, he learned to ride horses almost before he could properly read. He practiced with wooden swords beneath the relentless Dornish sun. Morning after morning, he crossed blades with older squires who outweighed him by many pounds. At first, he lost often. Every bruise became another lesson. Every defeat, another opportunity to improve. Unlike boys who grew angry after losing, Arthur simply asked to begin again and again. The master at arms noticed. Skill could be taught, strength could be built, but discipline belonged to the student alone. Arthur possessed it in abundance. As the years passed, his movements became smoother, his footwork lighter. He no longer relied upon speed alone. He learned patience. He learned timing. Most importantly, he learned when not to strike. Many experienced knights would later say that the finest swordsmen were not those who attacked first. They were those who understood the exact moment when an opponent had already defeated himself. Arthur seemed to grasp that lesson remarkably young. The older soldiers of Starfall began requesting him during practice bouts, not because they expected the young squire to defeat them, but because every month he seemed noticeably better than the month before. His improvement never stopped. Outside the castle walls, life moved at its usual gentle pace. Fishing boats returned with the morning tide. Merchants crossed the mountain passes into the Reach. Travelers rested beneath the banners of House Dayne before continuing towards Sunspear or Old Town. Arthur grew up, hearing stories from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Knights from the Stormlands spoke of fierce tournaments. Northern travelers described endless forests and bitter winters. Sailors arriving from the free cities told impossible tales of great temples, merchant princes, and forgotten ruins across the narrow sea. Each story made the world seem larger than the castle in which he had been born. Yet no matter how fascinating those distant lands appeared, Arthur never forgot where he came from. Every evening, as the setting sun bathed Starfall in warm golden light, the great hall displayed the sword that had defined House Dayne for countless generations. Dawn rested there in quiet dignity, not upon the hip of a knight, but waiting for the day someone proved worthy enough to carry it once more. As a young boy, Arthur often found himself standing silently before the ancient blade. He never reached out to touch it. He simply looked. Perhaps he wondered what kind of man had last carried it. Perhaps he imagined what it must feel like to bear the weight of so many generations upon one shoulder. Or perhaps he merely admired the beauty of his sword, unlike any other in the world. Whatever thoughts filled his mind during those quiet evenings, one thing slowly become certain. The old knights of Starfall had begun watching him with growing interest. Not because he was a Dane, there had always been Danes, but because, for the first time in many years, They believed they might be watching the future Sword of the Morning grow into the man history would one day remember. Time passed quietly at Starfall. The young boy who had once stood silently before the pale blade of dawn slowly grew into a man. His shoulders broadened, his movements became more confident. Years of disciplined training had shaped not only his body, but also his character. Arthur Dayne never sought attention. He never boasted of his victories. Those who trained beside him often remarked that he spoke less after winning than many men did after losing. Perhaps that quiet confidence became one of his greatest strengths. In a world filled with proud knights eager to prove themselves at every opportunity, Arthur seemed content to let his actions speak for him. As was expected of every noble son, he served first as a page and later as a squire. He learned not only the art of combat, but also the responsibilities of knighthood. A true knight was expected to protect the weak, honor his word, respect friend and foe alike. The ideals were easy enough to recite. Living by them was far more difficult. Arthur appeared to understand that difference from an early age. When his years as a squire finally came to an end, he received the honor he had spent his youth preparing for. He was knighted. For many men, that moment would have represented the greatest achievement of a lifetime. For Arthur Dayne, it was only the beginning. His reputation spread surprisingly quickly. Knights returning from tournaments spoke of a young Dornish swordsman whose skill seemed almost effortless. Veteran warriors who rarely praised anyone admitted that the young Dane possessed remarkable talent. It was not simply that he won. Many men could win. It was the manner in which he fought. Every movement appeared calm, measured, precise. He wasted almost no energy. His sword seemed to arrive exactly where it was needed, no sooner and no later. Watching Arthur fight reminded some observers less of a duel and more of a carefully practiced dance. Yet, despite growing fame, one question remained unanswered. Was he worthy of Dawn? That decision belonged not to kings nor to maesters. It rested with House Dayne itself. For generations, the family had guarded the ancient tradition surrounding their legendary sword. Only a knight judged exceptional in both skill and character could bear it. Many gifted warriors had lived and died without ever receiving that honor. One morning, somewhere within the ancient halls of Starfall, the decision was finally made. Arthur Dayne entered the great hall where Dawn had rested for years. The old knights of his house stood waiting. So did the elders who carried the memory of countless generations before them. No grand ceremony survives within the histories. No detailed account records every word that was spoken. Perhaps that silence is appropriate. Some moments belong only to those fortunate enough to witness them. The ancient blade was lifted from its resting place. Its pale surface caught the morning sunlight pouring through the high windows. For the first time in many years, Dawn had found a new bearer. Arthur Dayne became the Sword of the Morning. The title carried responsibilities beyond simple martial skill. From that day onward, Arthur no longer represented only himself. He carried the honor of every Sword of the Morning who had come before him. Every victory reflected upon House Dayne. Every mistake did as well. Those who met him afterward noticed little change. If anything, Arthur became even more humble. Perhaps he understood that greatness was easiest to lose when one began believing too strongly in it. His growing reputation eventually reached King's Landing. The Red Keep had long attracted the finest warriors in Westeros. Every king desired the greatest knights at his side. Among those who heard Arthur's name with increasing interest was Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Rhaegar differed greatly from many princes before him. Thoughtful and reserved, he preferred books and music to boasting and tournaments. Yet, he also possessed a deep respect for extraordinary people. When Arthur Dayne finally came to court, the two men quickly developed a friendship built upon mutual admiration. Though different in temperament, they shared qualities that were becoming increasingly rare. Neither enjoyed empty displays of pride. Neither sought unnecessary cruelty. Both believed duty demanded sacrifice. In time, Arthur became one of the prince's most trusted companions. Their friendship would one day shape the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. King Aerys II Targaryen also came to recognize Arthur's extraordinary reputation. The Kingsguard had always been reserved for the finest knights in the realm. 7 men, 7 white cloaks, each sworn to defend a king with his life. To be invited into that brotherhood represented the highest honor any knight could receive. Arthur accepted. When he placed the white cloak upon his shoulders, he surrendered forever the possibility of inheritance, marriage, and children. His life no longer belonged to himself. It belonged to the Iron Throne. Within the White Sword Tower, Arthur found himself surrounded by men whose names would also become legend. Sir Barristan Selmy, already celebrated throughout Westeros for his unmatched courage. Sir Gerald Hightower, the Lord Commander, steady, disciplined, and respected by every brother beneath his command. Sir Oswell Went, known for his sharp wit and unwavering loyalty. Together they formed one of the most famous generations ever to wear the white cloak. Yet, even among such remarkable company, Arthur's reputation continued to grow. Barristan Selmy himself will later remember him with enormous respect. Years afterward, when old age had slowed even Barristan's legendary sword arm, he still spoke of Arthur Dayne as one of the greatest warriors he had ever known. Many wondered whether any knight alive could truly defeat the Sword of the Morning while dawn rested in his hands. Some believed only Barristan himself might stand as an equal. Others quietly argued that not even he could. Stories spread from one castle to another. Some claimed Arthur could defeat several opponents at once. Others insisted he trained every morning before sunrise, regardless of weather or season. Like many legends, such tales grew with every retelling. Arthur himself did little to encourage them. He continued serving quietly beside the king, performing his duties without seeking praise. Yet beneath the peaceful appearance of the royal court, darker changes had already begun. King Aerys, once remembered as charming and ambitious, was becoming increasingly suspicious of those around him. Old friendships faded, distrust replaced confidence. The laughter that had once echoed through the Red Keep became noticeably rarer. Arthur watched these changes unfold from only a few steps away. As a member of the Kingsguard, his duty was clear: protect the king, no matter who that king might become. It was a simple oath. Living with its consequences would prove far more difficult, for the realm itself was slowly drifting toward a darkness from which there could be no easy return. And before long, the greatest knight in Westeros would find himself serving not the greatest king, but the Mad King. When Arthur Dayne first took his vows as a brother of the Kingsguard, few could have imagined how quickly the realm would change. The white cloak was meant to symbolize certainty, duty, honor, loyalty beyond question. A knight of the Kingsguard did not choose his king. He simply served. Arthur accepted that truth without complaint. Every morning began much the same. The Red Keep slowly awakened with the rising sun. Servants hurried through its winding halls. Maesters carried messages between towers. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchens while the bells of the Great Sept echoed faintly across King's Landing. For Arthur and his sworn brothers, the day began with duty. Guarding the king during audiences, standing silent beside the Iron Throne, escorting members of the royal family through the castle, training whenever time allowed. The work was rarely glorious. Most days passed without drawing a sword. Yet, the Kingsguard remained vigilant. Peace could disappear in a single heartbeat. Among Arthur's closest companions within the Order was Lord Commander Sir Gerald Hightower. Known throughout Westeros as the White Bull, Gerald was already an aging knight when Arthur joined the Brotherhood. His broad shoulders and stern expression gave him an intimidating appearance, but beneath that hard exterior lived a man deeply devoted to discipline. Gerald believed that a Kingsguard knight existed for one purpose alone. The oath came before everything, before friendship, before politics, even before personal conscience. Arthur respected him greatly. Though younger by many years, he often listened more than he spoke whenever the Lord Commander offered advice. Nearby was Ser Oswell Went. Where Gerald was serious and commanding, Oswell possessed an easier manner. He could smile even during difficult times, easing tension within the White Sword Tower after long days beside an increasingly unpredictable king. He and Arthur shared countless hours, standing watch together. Long nights passed quietly as they observed the flickering torchlight dancing across the stone walls of the Red Keep. No songs survive describing those ordinary conversations. History remembers battles. It rarely remembers friendships. Yet the bond between Arthur, Gerald, and Oswell would endure until the very end. Then there was Sir Barristan Selmy, already one of the greatest knights of his generation. Barristan's reputation stretched from Dorne to the Wall. Unlike many celebrated warriors, however, he carried his fame with remarkable humility. Arthur admired him. Barristan admired Arthur in return. The two men trained together often. Those fortunate enough to witness their practice bouts later spoke of them with quiet amazement. Neither fought to embarrass the other. Each sought only improvement. Steel rang against steel beneath the Dornish sun one day and the gray skies of King's Landing the next. Neither knight allowed pride to stand in the way of learning. Years later, Barristan would remember Arthur with unmistakable affection. When asked who had been the finest swordsman he had ever known, his thoughts often returned to the Sword of the Morning. Among the 7 white cloaks, there existed not rivalry, but brotherhood. Each man trusted the others with his life. That trust would soon be tested. For while the Kingsguard remained united, the king they served grew increasingly isolated. King Aerys II had not always been known as the Mad King. In his younger years, he had been charming, ambitious, even generous. But fear has a way of changing people. Small suspicions became constant doubts. Old friends became imagined enemies. Every disagreement appeared to hide a conspiracy. The years after the defiance of Duskendale seemed to break something deep within him. Held captive for months before his rescue by Sir Barristan Selmy, Aerys returned to King's Landing, a different man. He no longer trusted even those closest to him. He rarely left the Red Keep. His fingernails grew long, his hair became tangled, his temper became impossible to predict. Some days he laughed, others he screamed, sometimes both within the same hour. Arthur witnessed these changes from only a few steps away. His oath required silence. A Kingsguard knight did not question his king. He protected him, even when protecting him became more difficult than facing an enemy upon the battlefield. Only Prince Rhaegar seemed capable of calming the king, if only for a short while. Arthur remained one of the prince's closest companions. Whenever Rhaegar walked the halls of the Red Keep, Arthur was often nearby. The prince spoke softly. He preferred books to feasts and music to politics. Many wondered why a man so thoughtful had been born into such turbulent times. Arthur likely wondered the same. Their friendship grew stronger with each passing year. It was built not upon ambition, but respect. Yet outside the safety of the Red Keep, whispers spread across the Seven Kingdoms. The king's madness was no longer hidden. Lords spoke quietly in their castles. Some feared rebellion. Others believed change was inevitable. None dared speak openly. Not yet. Then came the great tourney at Harrenhal. It would become one of the most famous gatherings in the history of Westeros. Officially, Lord Walter Went organized the tournament to celebrate his family's prosperity. Knights from every corner of the realm answered the invitation. The greatest warriors assembled beneath the towering black walls of Harrenhal. King Aerys attended. So did Prince Rhaegar. Lord Rickard Stark traveled south with his family. Young Robert Baratheon rode beside Eddard Stark. Tywin Lannister remained absent, but many of his bannermen appeared. Never before had so many important figures gathered in one place. Looking back, it almost feels as though history itself had arranged the meeting. Arthur competed alongside the finest knights alive. Though the chronicles record many memorable contests, none suggest that his reputation suffered in any way. By then, few doubted his extraordinary skill. Whether standing upon the tournament grounds or beside the Iron Throne, the sword of the morning inspired quiet respect. Yet, it was not the tournament itself that people would remember most. It was the final day. Prince Rhaegar emerged victorious. After defeating every challenger, he rode forward carrying the crown, traditionally awarded to the Queen of Love and Beauty. Many expected him to place it upon the lap of his wife, Princess Aelia Martell. Instead, he rode past her, past countless watching lords, past the royal family itself, until he stopped before Lyanna Stark. Without a word, Rhaegar placed the crown of winter roses upon her lap. Silence spread across Harrenhal. Some watched in confusion, others in disbelief. A few already sensed that something important had changed. Arthur was there. Like the other members of the Kingsguard, he witnessed the moment unfold. No record tells us what crossed his mind. Perhaps surprise, perhaps concern, or perhaps he understood more than anyone else present. Whatever he thought, he gave no sign. That was the burden of the White Cloak. A Kingsguard knight observed everything. He explained nothing. After Harrenhal, The mood across the kingdom shifted. Old friendships became strained. New rumors spread almost daily. The smiles that had filled the tournament grounds gave way to anxious conversations behind closed doors. Arthur continued serving faithfully beside King Aerys, but each passing month forced him to confront an increasingly painful question. What happens when duty to the king begins to conflict with duty to honor? The Kingsguard swore to obey. The finest knights in Westeros believed in justice. Sometimes those paths no longer pointed in the same direction. Arthur Dayne found himself standing directly between them. And before long, his loyalty would no longer belong solely to the Iron Throne, but to the prince whose greatest secret was about to change the history of Westeros forever. The years following the tourney at Harrenhal passed beneath a growing shadow. The smiles and music that had filled the great halls of Harrenhal faded into uneasy memories, replaced by whispers that drifted through every castle in the Seven Kingdoms. No one could agree on exactly what had happened between Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Some believed it had been love at first sight. Others insisted she had been taken against her will. Many claimed to know the truth. Very few actually did. Arthur Dayne was almost certainly one of them. As one of Prince Rhaegar's closest friends, Arthur remained at his side through many of the prince's most important decisions. The chronicles tell us little of their private conversations. Perhaps they walked together through the gardens of the Red Keep. Perhaps they spoke while riding across the Kingsguard. Perhaps they sat quietly beside a campfire during long journeys across the realm. Whatever words passed between them have been lost to history, but actions often reveal what words cannot. At some point after Harrenhal, Rhaegar disappeared from public view. With him went Lyanna Stark. To the rest of Westeros, the story appeared simple. The heir to the Iron Throne had carried away the daughter of Lord Rickard Stark. Whether she had gone willingly or not scarcely mattered to those left behind. Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing demanding justice. Instead, he found death. Lord Rickard Stark followed. He too died beneath the cruelty of King Aerys. The Mad King's paranoia finally exploded into open violence when Aerys demanded the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark from Jon Arryn. The Lord of the Eyrie refused. His refusal ignited a rebellion that would reshape the history of Westeros forever. Across the realm, great houses chose their sides. Robert Baratheon raised his banners in the Stormlands. Eddard Stark marched south from Winterfell. Jon Arryn called the Knights of the Vale. House Tully joined their cause through marriage and alliance. Meanwhile, loyalists gathered around the Iron Throne. The kingdom divided almost overnight. Arthur Dayne watched these events unfold from the heart of the royal family. He had sworn to defend King Aerys, yet his closest friendship remained with Prince Rhaegar. The king descended further into madness with every passing moon. The prince carried the hopes of nearly every loyal lord. Between them stood Arthur, bound by oath, bound by friendship, unable to abandon either. Eventually, Prince Rhaegar departed to gather the armies loyal to the crown. Before leaving, however, he entrusted Arthur Dayne with perhaps the most important duty of his life. Far to the north of Dorne, hidden among the lonely Red Mountains, stood an isolated stone tower. It possessed no famous history, no mighty walls, no great army, only silence. In later years, men would remember it by a simple name: the Tower of Joy. There, far from the great roads and the eyes of the realm, Lyanna Stark remained hidden. With Arthur Dayne stood two other brothers of the Kingsguard, Lord Commander Gerald Hightower and Sir Oswell Went, three of the greatest knights in Westeros, not protecting the king, not guarding the Iron Throne, but standing watch over a lonely tower in the mountains. For generations, readers and maesters alike have asked the same question. Why would three members of the Kingsguard remain so far from King's Landing while a kingdom tore itself apart? The answer likely rested with Rhaegar himself. Whatever secret lay inside that tower, the prince considered it more important than the Iron Throne, more important than the capital, perhaps even more important than winning the war. Arthur never questioned the order. He remained exactly where he had been told. That decision has often puzzled those who study his life. Surely the greatest swordsman in Westeros could have changed the course of Robert's rebellion upon countless battlefields, at Ashford, at the Bells, even upon the Trident itself. Instead, he waited, day after day, week after week. The war continued far beyond the mountains. Messengers occasionally reached the tower, carrying news from the outside world. Robert Baratheon had won another victory. Lord Tywin Lannister remained neutral. Prince Rhaegar had gathered the royal host. Then came the greatest news of all. There, upon the banks of the great river, Prince Rhaegar met Robert Baratheon in single combat. The prince fell. His famous ruby armor shattered beneath Robert's warhammer, sending crimson gemstones into the rushing water. With Rhaegar's death, the fate of House Targaryen was all but sealed. Soon afterward, King's Landing itself fell. King Aerys II was slain inside the Red Keep, not by an enemy, but by one of his own Kingsguard, Sir Jaime Lannister. The dynasty Arthur had sworn to protect collapsed within only a few terrible days. The Iron Throne now belonged to Robert Baratheon, yet Arthur Dayne did not leave the Tower of Joy. Neither did Gerald Hightower, nor Oswell Went. Their prince was dead. Their king was dead. The war, for all practical purposes, had already been decided. Still, there remained. To some, that decision seemed foolish. To Arthur, it was simply another oath. The Kingsguard did not abandon the duty they had been given, even if every kingdom around them had changed. Even if no one else understood. Honor is rarely convenient. Sometimes it demands sacrifice without promise of reward. Arthur had spent his entire life believing that a knight's word mattered. If an oath could be broken whenever circumstances became difficult, then it had never possessed any meaning at all. Perhaps he knew they would never leave those mountains alive. Perhaps Gerald knew as well. Perhaps Oswell. Yet none of them rode away. The white cloaks remained where Prince Rhaegar had placed them, watching, waiting, guarding a secret that would one day shape the future of Westeros. Eventually, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the lonely mountain pass. A small company rode toward the tower beneath the banners of House Stark. At their head was Lord Eddard Stark. He had survived the rebellion. He had buried his friends. He had watched kingdoms rise and fall. Now, he had come for his sister. And waiting for him beneath the pale Dornish sky stood 3 knights in white cloaks, ready to make their final stand. The morning was quiet. Only the wind moved across the red mountains of Dorne. carrying dust through the narrow passes that surrounded the lonely tower. For many weeks, perhaps even months, Arthur Dayne, Gayrold Hightower, and Oswell Went had stood their watch. The war had already been decided. King Aerys was dead. Prince Rhaegar had fallen upon the Trident. King's Landing belonged to Robert Baratheon. The Targaryen dynasty had collapsed. Yet the three White Cloaks remained. Their duty had not changed. Somewhere inside the Tower of Joy waited the reason they had never abandoned their post. Then, at last, riders appeared on the horizon. Only 7 men. No banners fluttered in the wind. No army marched behind them. At their head rode Lord Eddard Stark. Beside him were 6 companions who had survived the rebellion. They had crossed half the realm searching for Lyanna Stark. Now their journey had reached its end. Ned slowed his horse as the tower came into view. 3 White Cloaks stood waiting before its entrance. The morning sun reflected softly from their armor. They had expected this moment. None of them reached for their swords. Not yet. For a few quiet moments, neither side spoke. Only the breeze disturbed the silence. It is one of the most famous scenes in all the history of Westeros. Though years later Bran Stark would witness it through the strange visions of the three-eyed raven, the memory remained almost dreamlike. The words exchanged that morning became legend. Ser Gayrold Hightower stepped forward first. We swore a vow, simple words, yet they carried the weight of a lifetime. Ned looked upon the 3 men before him. He had known Arthur Dayne by reputation. Every knight in Westeros had. He had seen Ser Gayrold at court. He understood exactly who stood in his path. These were not cruel men. They were not outlaws. They were honorable knights, carrying out the final command given to them by their prince. Ned himself was an honorable man. He understood duty better than most. Perhaps that knowledge made the moment even more painful. According to the old story, Ned spoke quietly. I looked for you on the Trident. It was not an accusation, only a question. Why had 3 of the finest knights in the realm remained absent while Prince Rhaegar fought for his life? Ser Gayrold answered, we were not there. Nothing more, nothing less. The explanation was enough. Wherever Rhaegar had commanded them to stand, that was where they remained. Ned then spoke of the fallen king. King's Landing has fallen. The Mad King is dead. Again, the White Cloaks did not move. We do not flee. Their king was gone. Their prince was gone. Still, they did not flee. Arthur Dayne remained silent throughout much of the exchange. He had never been a man of many words. His reputation had always rested upon actions rather than speeches. When, at last, he spoke, his voice was calm. And now it begins. No one can say with certainty exactly what he meant. Perhaps the battle. Perhaps the final fulfillment of his oath. Perhaps the beginning of a new age for Westeros. Whatever the meaning, everyone present understood what would come next. There could be no peaceful ending. Ned wished to reach the tower. Arthur and his brothers would never allow it while they still breathed. Slowly, Arthur reached over his shoulder. From its sheath came dawn. Even among legendary swords, dawn was unmistakable. Its pale blade caught the morning light until it almost seemed to glow. Unlike the dark ripples of Valyrian steel, dawn shone with a quiet brilliance, as though a fragment of the morning sky itself had been forged into a sword. The old stories claimed it had been made from the heart of a fallen star. Looking upon it, one could almost believe them. Ned Stark drew ice. His companions unsheathed their own weapons. Steel whispered across leather. 7 men faced 3. By every measure, the odds favored the Northmen. Yet numbers alone meant little against the greatest swordsmen of an age. The first clash came without warning. Steel rang sharply through the mountain pass. Arthur moved with astonishing speed. Years of discipline flowed effortlessly into every strike. He did not fight wildly. There was no wasted motion. Each step carried purpose. Each swing ended exactly where it needed to. Beside him, Gayhold Hightower fought with the steady strength that had earned him the name White Bull. Oswell Went guarded Arthur's flank, matching every attack with calm precision. The 3 Kingsguard fought as brothers who had trusted one another for decades. Again and again, Ned's companions pressed forward. Again and again, they were forced back. Arthur's white cloak danced through the dust as dawn flashed from one opponent to another. The pale blade seemed almost alive beneath the morning sun. 1 man fell, then another. The narrow ground around the tower became littered with broken shields and abandoned weapons. No songs could ever fully capture what happened there. Only a handful of men witnessed the battle. Fewer still survived it. Even years afterward, those who spoke of Arthur Dayne did so with awe. Many believed no knight had ever matched his skill while wielding dawn. Against overwhelming numbers, he continued fighting, not with anger, not with hatred, but with the quiet determination of a man who had accepted his fate long before the first sword was drawn. Eventually, only 2 men remained standing: Eddard Stark and Arthur Dayne. Both were exhausted. Both carried wounds. Dust clung to their armor. Their breathing had grown heavy. For a brief moment, they circled one another beneath the pale Dornish sky. History remembers what happened next, but not because Ned Stark defeated Arthur Dayne alone. At the final moment, Howland Reed, Ned's quiet companion from the neck, intervened. Exactly how remains uncertain. Some accounts suggest he struck Arthur from behind. Others say he distracted him only for an instant. Whatever truly happened, that single moment changed everything. Arthur turned, only briefly. It was enough. Ned's blade found its opening. The sword of the morning staggered. Dawn slipped from his hand. Slowly, Arthur Dayne fell to the earth. Silence returned to the mountains. The battle was over. Of the 10 men who had faced one another that morning, only Ned Stark and Howland Reed remained alive. Ned did something few victorious commanders might have considered. He did not claim Dawn as a prize. Instead, he carried the legendary sword back to Starfall himself. It was a gesture of deep respect. Arthur Dayne had died as a true knight. His family's ancestral blade deserved to return home. And so the sword of the morning passed into legend. His watch had ended, his oath fulfilled. Yet, strangely, his reputation had only just begun. For in the years that followed, warriors across Westeros would speak of Arthur Dayne, not merely as a great knight, but perhaps the greatest who had ever lived. With Arthur Dayne's death, one of the brightest chapters in the history of knighthood came to an end. Yet, unlike many famous warriors, his reputation did not fade with the passing years. Instead, it grew. Long after Robert Baratheon claimed the Iron Throne, long after the last dragons had vanished, and even after a new generation of knights filled the courts of Westeros, Arthur Dayne remained the standard against which every swordsman was measured. The question has echoed across castles, taverns, and libraries ever since. Was Arthur Dayne truly the greatest knight who ever lived? It is a fascinating question. Unfortunately, it has no perfect answer. The histories of Westeros are not tournament records. They contain songs, memories, and stories passed from one generation to the next. No list exists ranking every knight. No maester ever organized formal comparisons between the greatest warriors of different centuries. Instead, we must rely upon the words of those who knew them. Those words reveal something remarkable. Very few legendary warriors are praised by everyone. Even the greatest kings had enemies. Even famous generals were criticized. Arthur Dayne is different. Almost every character who speaks of him does so with admiration. Even those who fought against House Targaryen rarely question his skill or his honor. That alone makes him unusual. Perhaps the strongest testimony comes from Sir Barristan Selmy. Barristan was not a singer exaggerating old tales. He was one of the greatest knights Westeros had ever produced. He had crossed swords with famous warriors throughout his long life. He rescued King Aerys from Duskendale. He fought in tournaments across the realm. He survived Robert's rebellion. He later served Daenerys Targaryen in distant Meereen. Few men possessed more experience. When Barristan reflected upon Arthur Dayne, his words carried enormous weight. He once remarked that, with dawn in his hands, Arthur had been the finest knight he had ever seen. Notice the wording. Barristan did not simply call Arthur brave or honorable. He spoke specifically of his ability with the sword. Coming from a warrior of Barristan's reputation, such praise is extraordinary. Yet Barristan never diminished himself in making that statement. Indeed, many readers have long debated which of the two might have prevailed in a fair duel. George R.R. Martin himself has offered perhaps the most famous answer. When asked whether Arthur Dayne or Barristan Selmy would win, Martin explained that the two knights were evenly matched, but if Arthur carried dawn, he would possess the advantage. It is an important distinction. Dawn was not magical, did not grant supernatural strength, yet it remained one of the finest swords ever forged. Lighter than ordinary steel, perfectly balanced, a weapon worthy of an already extraordinary swordsman. Of course, Arthur's greatest rival in the minds of many fans is another member of the Kingsguard, Sir Jaime Lannister. Young Jaime possessed astonishing natural talent. Even before reaching adulthood, experienced knights recognized his remarkable speed and confidence. During the War of the Five Kings, Jaime himself admitted that only a handful of living men might equal him with a sword. Many readers have wondered how the Kingslayer would fare against the Sword of the Morning. The answer is impossible to know. The two men never crossed blades. Yet Jaime's own thoughts offer an interesting clue. Whenever he remembered Arthur Dayne, it was never with jealousy. It was admiration. Jaime had served beside Arthur during the final years of King Aerys' reign. He watched him train. He watched him perform his duties. Arthur became the ideal Jaime hoped one day to become. Years later, burdened by guilt and regret, Jaime still remembered the Sword of the Morning as the very image of what a knight should be. That respect speaks volumes. Then there is another legendary name from an earlier age, Prince Aemon Targaryen, better known as Aemon the Dragon Knight. Like Arthur, Aemon belonged to the Kingsguard. Like Arthur, he became famous for unmatched skill and unwavering devotion to duty. For generations, singers celebrated Aemon as the perfect knight. Before Arthur Dayne, many believed no greater swordsman had ever lived. Comparing the two is almost impossible. They lived nearly a century apart. Their enemies differed. Their worlds were different. Yet the similarities are striking. Both men placed honor above comfort. Both remained loyal, even when loyalty demanded sacrifice. Both died while defending others rather than themselves. It is no coincidence that Arthur is so often compared with Aemon. In many ways, he became the Dragon Knight of a later generation. Even among the greatest warriors of history, Arthur occupies a unique place. Why? Part of the answer lies in what George R.R. Martin chose not to show us. Readers never witness Arthur Dayne's greatest victories directly. We hear about them afterward, through memories, through conversations, through the admiration of others. It is a powerful storytelling technique. Rather than constantly proving Arthur's greatness, Martin allows dozens of respected characters to build that reputation for him. Barristan remembers him fondly. Jaime admires him. Eddard Stark never speaks ill of him. Even enemies treat his name with respect. When so many trustworthy voices agree upon the same conclusion, the legend begins to feel believable. Another reason Arthur remains so memorable is that he embodies an ideal already disappearing from Westeros. The age of true knights was ending. Politics increasingly outweighed honor. Ambition replaced loyalty. Men sought power rather than virtue. Arthur seemed almost like a figure from an older world, a world where promises still mattered, where courage meant more than victory, where a knight's word carried greater weight than a king's command. Ironically, those very ideals led him to his death. He did not survive because he refused to abandon his oath. Yet that sacrifice became the foundation of his legend. Many warriors become famous because they lived long enough to win many battles. Arthur became legendary because he chose honor over survival. His final stand at the Tower of Joy transformed an already respected knight into something far greater. He became a symbol, not of perfection, but of the impossible standard that every true knight hoped to reach. Whether anyone ever surpassed Arthur Dayne with a sword is a question that may never be answered. Perhaps Barristan in his youth could have matched him. Perhaps Jaime at the height of his abilities. Perhaps some forgotten hero whose name never found its way into the histories. The truth has vanished with time. But perhaps that uncertainty is exactly why Arthur's story continues to endure. Legends are not measured only by victories. They are measured by memory. And few names in the history of Westeros have been remembered with greater admiration than Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning.